Hi, everybody. It's Beth Carrison Vanderhyde with the Alpha Gal Support Non-Public page. I wanted to take some time to walk you through some presentations that were done recently by 4 members of the Alpha Gal community, and I could also introduce a little history to Alpha Gal that you may or may not know. And I imagine this is going to be shared around a little bit, so we want to make sure that the information is complete and helpful to you, whether you are somebody diagnosed with alpha-gal or if you are a physician looking at this for information. So I hope you find this to be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation for you. Hopefully this goes well. Okay, here we go. So on February 12th, 2018, 4 members of the Alpha Gal community were afforded the opportunity to speak to the tick-borne diseases working group. For more information, you can reach us at tick-borne-conditionsunited@gmail.com, or you can find all 4 of the speakers on Alpha Gal Support Non-Public, which is on Facebook. There's many other Facebook groups, but all 4 of the speakers that you're going to hear today can be found in this one location. And most of the admins are connected to all of the groups, or the majority of the groups, so that we stay together, share the information, and support one another as best as we can. Okay, so little history. What is alpha-gal? Move this out of the way. All right, what is alpha-gal syndrome? Well, alpha-gal allergy is a condition also known as the red meat allergy. The alpha-gal allergy can cause a person to have an anaphylactic and hypersensitivity reaction when they're exposed to mammalian meat and products made from mammal. The term alpha-gal is short for galactose alpha 1,3-galactose, which is a string that sticks together. It's a carbohydrate molecule that can cause an allergic reaction in people with the alpha-gal allergy. And really the telltale sign that makes us very different and unique than most allergies, there's many things, but one that stands out is that it's a 2 to 10 hour delay from the time of ingestion, for the most part. Some individuals we're finding are starting to react much sooner. And there are some factors that speed up the reaction. It could be alcohol involved, or it could be there's a number of things. You can look at the history behind that. I'm not going to get into that. The molecule is found in mammals, including cows, pigs, venison, bison, sheep, rabbit. Those are most commonly found foods, or mammal-sourced foods here in the United States. Alpha-gal has been directly linked to the bite of a Lone Star tick, and that's the other very unique telltale connection with the alpha-gal allergy. And the reason why it's called the Lone Star tick is the female has a spot on her back, which makes her very unique. Now, there's other ticks and other insects around the world that have been linked to this allergy, but here in the United States, so far, definitively, it's been connected to the Lone Star tick. Until recently, there's been some connection with reactivity to the alpha-gal molecule in patients with Lyme borrelia. So you want to go ahead and get yourself a copy of this slide presentation, because all of these hyperlinks will lead you to the supportive documentation of these claims. Okay. So what happens if you happen to have mammal? I mean, is it really that bad? That's what I get asked all the time. Well, it's a lot like having a severe peanut allergy, or a peanut allergy in general. Most people have heard by now what a peanut allergy, what happens when somebody is exposed. You know, they might have tingling, itchy mouth, they might have hives or burning skin, swelling of the face, tongue, throat, other parts of their body, wheezing, like asthmatic reaction, or gastrointestinal distress, dizziness, lightheaded, fainting, headaches, and then of course in severe cases, which happens almost every day with all of us, somebody is calling into us saying they're having a reaction, or reporting in, would be anaphylaxis. And this is a life-threatening situation when this occurs. So how do you avoid all of those things? Well, really the only way is just complete abstinence of mammalian products. But realistically, that makes it really difficult, and you'll learn a little more why in the about why in the further in the presentation. But so physicians will recommend a controlling dose, like a daily antihistamine or corticosteroids, and then of course the treatment for anaphylaxis is a shot of epinephrine. But none of those are guarantees that it will save your life, even with 2 shots of epinephrine. So it's really important to adhere to the no mammalian products. So this is the Lone Star tick, Ambloma americanum. You see it in the 3 different stages: the larval, the nymph, and the adult. The male and the female look a little bit different. You can see the female has a spot on her back, but what's important to know is that they will hunt or quest for food in all of their stages. And they're great hunters. They lock onto their target. They can sense you from very, very far away, more so than any other tick. And it literally will run to its target. Well, if you are unfortunate enough to brush up against a leafy matter along a trail, if you're hunting or fishing or hiking or gardening maybe, and the little nymphs and larvals on the end of the blade of grass that you brush up against, you'll have what's considered a swarm on you. And it looks like a bunch of dirt, like speckles of dirt. So you want to brush that off, but they're meant to be clingy, so that can be difficult. So the recommendation, this is a friendly little tip for you. If you know you're going to be in that kind of environment, I would suggest carrying a roll of like packing tape, or better yet, one of those rollers, like the lint rollers. And then that way you can just brush them. You can get them right off you much faster. All right, so for more history about alpha-gal, you want to get a hold of the slide again and look at some of these links, because there's very interesting history behind here. So you can learn how Martha Stewart had a play in alpha-gal. It goes back to the whole stock scandal. And Dr. Scott Cummings, he educates you about the connection there, as well as the connection to the original findings through Dr. Platts Mills while at University of Virginia. And then, of course, it's not just Martha that's famous with this, but it's also John Gershom, excuse me. He's a famous author. You may know him. He actually also has alpha-gal. And then there is a very entertaining, very educational podcast on Radiolab about alpha-gal. I would encourage you, especially if you're diagnosed with alpha-gal, it's a dry humor, but you might find it kind of funny and relieving in a way to listen from a patient's perspective, her experience with alpha-gal. But Dr. Platts Mills is on there, and he gives a great commentary and explanation. Okay, so this is what we run into all the time. We're asked, what is a mammal? So when you go to a restaurant and they ask you, now they very nicely ask you, what are you allergic to? And you say, oh, I'm allergic to mammal. You can see them go, 3rd grade science, what is a mammal? Well, I always say it's easier to think of the animal meat that I can eat, and that is poultry and fish, or fins and feathers is a nice way to think about it. So the things that we need to look out for traditionally in the United States, the meats that we would encounter would be cow, pig, lamb, deer, elk, and maybe rabbit. And, here's a couple examples of what we're looking at. Unfortunately, bacon or steaks and hamburgers and even pizza. So pizza presents a couple of different challenges for us. Not only is it the meat-covered pizza, but it could be the dairy on the pizza because that comes from a cow. And then also cross-contamination with cutting rollers. So we'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. So do you only need to avoid meat? That's the next question. First it's always, so are you vegan? No, I can eat fins and feathers or poultry and fish. Okay, so is there anything else you need to watch out for? Well, yes, there is actually. There's a few things, potentially. So some people, it's just the meat. For many of us, it's also the dairy that comes from a mammal, so goat or cow. Not everyone reacts to the dairy, and not everyone reacts to mammalian product that can be found in smaller amounts in other ingredient names, like a magnesium stearate or a vitamin D fortified orange juice. The D could be made from lanolin, or artificial vanilla, which you can look that one up, or any number of things, which I'll show you a couple examples in the slide coming up. But many of us are finding ourselves not only reactive to the meat, but also to the dairy and airborne exposure. Sometimes when we breathe it in, it can be the same reaction. It could be full anaphylaxis, or it could be hives, or it could just be as it's kind of hitting our skin, the particles that's in there, all of a sudden our skin will just, get hives and burning and things like that, like our typical reaction that we would have. And then, of course, cross-contamination. So on things like grills. In my house, we have 2 separate grills. We have one for mammal and one for everything else. So grills, cutting boards, shared utensils. It could be a cutter or a stirring spoon or something like that. Okay, so here is a slide that shows you just some of the strange places that mammal finds its way in our everyday lives. It's not the ingredient names, because there's just an endless list, and it would kind of make your eyes glaze over if it hasn't already. But this is a listing of some of the things that we have to be on guard for. So really, when you're diagnosed with alpha-gal, you need to be on guard for everything that goes in, on, or around you. That's the experience that we're having every day across the population of people with alpha-gal. So from things like footwear or pocketbooks or luggage that can be made from mammals, some people are reacting to that. Cross-contamination, I discussed fireworks has been a problem. That was a big surprise for most of us. Different hormones, medications. And in fact, if you look at Dr. Cummins' presentation at the UNC, he has it in writing and video or audio, and you listen to the history of alpha-gal. Dr. Platts-Mill's team originally found the connection to a cancer drug, which is how it links back to Martha Stewart. But the drug was causing this reaction, and through a series of events, they made some connections, saw some maps that look similar to ticks, tick-borne diseases caused by the Lone Star tick, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And the rest is history. They made the connection, and we know that now the alpha-gal that's in mammal is causing these reactions, but we also know from the history that the small amount of mammal that is found in medications is causing a problem for patients. So that medication could be as simple as IV fluid, having gelatin as a filler. It could be magnesium stearate. It could be the gelatin-filled capsules, or it could be any number of things. Like in vaccinations, you'll see beef serum and other mammal in vaccinations, and not just necessarily described as beef or bovine, but in very unassuming names. So when you drill down into the information, you see there's still mammal components in there. HIV medications, we just learned this recently, that some of the core HIV medications that patients would be on contain mammal. So this could be a very big concern for people, let's say in South Africa or around the world infected with HIV. Refined sugar can be processed through bone char, predominantly bovine. That can be an issue for people. Felt, footballs, of course, because of leather. Certain plastics. There's slip agents that go on to plastics, and that might have a mammal component. Lots of places that it ends up in our everyday lives. And I think I had even said this was a strange find for me, but makeup brushes. That was a strange one. And air filters, that's a little unavoidable. And perfumes and colognes, it's very pervasive, as well as air fresheners. So detergents, soaps, I mean, you can read here, this is quite a bit. So some basic facts to consider. There's no known cure for alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is not officially tracked by the CDC, therefore physicians are not required to report the number of alpha-gal cases. And even still, if they try to report alpha-gal cases, they can't specifically because there's no code right now, which will be covered in one of our presentations. Research for alpha-gal allergy has not been included in any of the tick-borne disease working group or discussions. Most physicians, first responders, hospitals, pharmacists are completely unaware of alpha-gal. They don't even know that it exists. And then when they do dial into their databases and their resources, it's either severely lacking or it's absent altogether. In my case recently, I cut my my finger on some new kitchen knives for my husband, ended up at the ER, and unfortunately, they didn't have any knowledge of alpha-gal. And it was quite a challenge having that conversation as I am in excruciating pain. I had a very severe accident with this knife, and they're putting adhesives on me and I'm starting to react to the adhesives. And, they're talking about maybe an IV. Well, the IV I knew had gelatin in it. The tetanus shot has had beef in it as well, so I couldn't have that. So it definitely is a challenge for physicians as well as the patient. But also what's important to know here with regards to the first responder professions, they're not only left unarmed knowing how to help their patients before them, but they're also susceptible to getting this because, just for an example, over this past summer, there was a young woman who got in a really bad car accident on the highway that I witnessed, and I pulled over and I went off. Her car went up into the woods, and I went into the woods to sit with her. Well, the first responders came, and I was covered in ticks. I mean, covered in ticks, Lone Star ticks and deer ticks, and this was in southern Maine off of Route 95. And all I could think of is, at the time, I knew, I told others to go away because I didn't want them to get sick. And my husband was gracious and encouraged them to listen to me and heed my warning because I had Lone Star ticks and deer ticks on me. But all I could think of was these poor first responders have absolutely no idea that their lives could change for forever, instantly. Just trying to save somebody's life. And that's really not good. And I would love to see that change and some sort of regulation change where first responders' gears have to be treated with a repellent that is safe for them and protects them. Alpha-gal is excluded from most educational materials regarding diseases and conditions associated with Lone Star ticks. So if you look at the CDC website and you look up Lone Star ticks, you're not going to see any association to alpha-gal to the Lone Star tick. So if a physician, like in my case when I talked with the ER, if they went to the CDC website, they wouldn't see anything about alpha-gal associated to this Lone Star tick that I'm saying I'm getting this from. And if I was a patient that came in with a tick bite from a Lone Star tick, they're going to look and see a handful of diseases they need to test for, but they won't see alpha-gal. So that physician is sending this patient that's just been bitten from this Lone Star tick home, waiting for results to see if they're sick, maybe a prophylactic antibiotic. But there's no warning, no caution, no epinephrine, no go get some Benadryl just in case. There's none of that conversation taking place. So the patient goes home and they are potentially having a hamburger or steak or, breakfast sausage, bacon, ham, something like that. And within a short period of time, they develop this allergy potentially, and they're left unarmed. They don't have Benadryl, they don't have epinephrine, and they have no knowledge this is coming their way. And that is very unsafe. And I know nobody wants that to happen. I put no blame on the physicians. They're not aware their information is lacking. And that's why we're very passionate about this subject and want to have this change, and have been pursuing this conversation as strongly as we have. Likewise, the maps are very outdated all around. So right now, if you look on the CDC website, it's, I believe, dated 2015, and today is February 28th, 2018. So it's about three years outdated. And as of today, right now, we happen to know through articles posted in the public and members reporting in, that the Lone Star tick has been found all the way up the East Coast into Maine and into Canada, over into Minnesota, and as well as in Alaska. That news just came yesterday. And so that's not included in the CDC website map showing the distribution of the lone tick. And that information replicates into the states and into other literature. So that needs to get caught up. What's really important to know is some individuals just don't get this allergy. We don't know why. You could be bitten, your husband could be bitten, and one of you will get it, one of you don't. Researchers don't have a good handle on that yet. More to come. Some go into remission, but if they're bitten again by the Lone Star tick, the symptoms often return and they're worse, according to the reports that we have had. So why isn't the CDC paying attention to this, the Centers for Disease Control? Well, it's just simply that it hasn't been considered a disease, but rather an allergy. And what does it take for the alpha-gal to get included in these conversations? It takes a lot of persistence and a lot of volunteer work. So that's what your admins in the alpha-gal support groups have been doing, and as well as Dr. Cummins and Dr. Platts-Mills. They've been advocating and trying to get this heard a little bit louder. And so thankfully, we know that we can start to change this conversation right here every single day, having the conversation. You never know where the turning point is. So we're better together. So thank you for everybody worldwide, from South Africa, Sweden, I believe Turkey was involved, Australia, various groups around the country that are members of the alpha-gal group, scientists, and some doctors that contributed. I'm just so thankful that everybody came together on this and continues to do that. So thank you for everybody, including the working group, including the folks that you are reviewing. From the bottom of our heart, we thank you for all that you're doing. So a little history how this all came to be. The 21st Century Cures Act was enacted in December 2016. It authorizes the Health and Human Services Secretary to establish tick-borne disease working group to serve as a federal advisory committee. And that committee is, the working group is made up of both federal and civil employees. And in fact, well, I'll mention that in a minute. Okay, so tick-borne disease working group was formed under Section 2062 of the 21st Century Cures Act, and they're under the heading of that, number one, they need to conduct or support research on vector-borne diseases, and number two, establish tick-borne disease working group to review the Health and Human Services efforts regarding tick-borne diseases. So here you can see there's a hyperlink to the word charter, and that will tell you all the rules that and the guidelines that they have been asked to review. And all these people came together, and they were broken out into 6 different subcommittees. And the 2 committees we felt very strongly had to be spoken to. We figured these were the people that really will help everything else. We really wanted to be heard first by access to care, services, and support to patients, because of everything I just explained and everything you're about to hear. It's really important that patients get the care that they get, because we have infants all the way into the 80s, patients being diagnosed. And so we have, schools and therapeutic rehab centers. We even had an incident working with a corrections facility, trying to educate them about one of their inmates and what care needed to take place. That was quite a challenge. And then, of course, elder care and things like that, and just everyday care for a patient. The other was disease vectors, surveillance, and prevention, because without the data, we just can't move forward. So the working group's objective and scope of activities is noted here in blue. The tick-borne disease working group was established to provide expertise and review all health and human service efforts related to tick-borne diseases to help ensure interagency coordination and minimize overlap, examine research priorities, and identify and address unmet needs. Well, unmet needs would be the fact that alpha-gal is not included. In addition, the working group will support the Secretary of Health and Human Services and Congress on their findings and any recommendations for the federal response to tick-borne disease prevention, treatment, and research, and addressing gaps in those areas. And that's exactly what we addressed, were the gaps. A little more history. This all really got kickstarted back in July when a few members of the alpha-gal community tried to be heard in a public meeting. And that took place on August 16th. But on July 17th, a notice was published for nominations for anybody that was interested on the federal side or the civilian side to join the tick-borne disease working group. And we did have a few people, regular everyday folks, researchers, physicians, and such, environmentalists, and none of the alpha-gal folks that applied were accepted. And really, during that meeting on the 16th, the reason was clear. They didn't accept it into the conversation because they were still operating under the disease heading, and had to kind of narrow their focus at that time. And so the whole conversation was tabled. Everything having to do with alpha-gal, nothing else could be heard the rest of the time, and nobody was accepted in from the alpha-gal community. So as frustrating as that was, we didn't give up. We kept pressing on. And so if you're wondering what we're doing at night, your admins, these are the things that we're doing as we're strategizing and trying to have these conversations. How do we, get heard? So thanks to everybody that continues to push out, information to their friends and their family, and all the interviews that are being done worldwide. It really does make a difference. On February 7th, we had a deadline to submit commentary to the working group. I know I submitted something. I know of no one else that did within the alpha-gal community. And I took the opportunity to take up all 2,000 words, 4 pages long, as much as I could to be heard. And then I also applied to be heard by speaking to the working group on the 12th. And 3 others from the alpha-gal community did as well. And we really didn't expect all 4 of us. We expected just 1. So thinking of that, we were very targeted because we only had 3 minutes to speak. And at the end of 3 minutes, our phone lines would be cut off, and that was it. So we thought, if anything happens, one person gets it, what do we want to say? So what we had to do is really look at all the members of the committee, the affiliations they had, and speak to those 2 subjects that we had said, which was patient care and like the data collection, the prevention and surveillance. So we thought, okay, who are the members we're talking to? What is their expertise and which categories are they in, which subcommittee? So we were very laser focused, and it was a miracle that 4 of us got accepted. Now that could have been simply that not a lot of people applied, they didn't know about the meeting, and it was just a lucky roll of the dice. But regardless, we still consider it a miracle because we were heard. 4 of us were heard. So the whole goal, knowing the history of what their charter is, what they're tasked with, our goal was to make sure that alpha-gal allergy syndrome was included in the tick-borne disease working group's conversations, that it would be recommended to be included in the research going forward, but also all tick-borne conditions, because if you've ever tried to put a puzzle together, if you're missing one piece, you can't put that puzzle together, right? So we don't have just one puzzle piece missing, we have several. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to call up this the speeches now, and hopefully we won't have too much of a technical difficulty because I have been having that. Apologies, I'll fire this up. Okay, so what you're going to hear these 8 speakers go. There are 3 minutes apiece. 2 things to be aware of. You'll hear a little alarm. That's a warning to the speaker that 15 seconds before their time is up, the alarm sounds. And then the other thing you'll hear is Gary Sweeney. His line dropped and was very graciously allowed to speak at the very end after Kathy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start to listen. Hopefully, I've had some sound trouble with this, or it keeps cutting off, so hopefully I won't have that today.
PA Lyme Resource Network, which is a 501c3 in Pennsylvania, providing outreach, support, and education and advocacy services to both the general public and the medical community in Pennsylvania. I have provided testimony as background to all of you that was provided in the PA Senate this past October, so please refer to that for more detail. I would like to make 3 comments, 3 points. And this is all based on the experience of our organization with over 8,000 to 10,000 patients annually in Pennsylvania. And it represents their point of view. It also represents my point of view as a parent with 3 children afflicted by these diseases, and personally as someone who became dementia-like because of these diseases, and with appropriate advocacy by ourselves and access to resources, reverse that and quite high functioning today. So with that said, the first point is that in our view, the situation is quite serious. Pennsylvania, as you know, is #1 in reported cases and continues to increase. The large percentage are children through young adults. And what we have seen in recent years is extremely concerning, and that is an increasing death count. Over the last year, we lost a 25-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 50-year-old with 2 young children, and a 39-year-old. All of these would not in any way be confirmed as due to tick-borne diseases without the intervention of their families, working with the coroners to make sure that the cause of death was reported. So we are not in any way tracking deaths associated with tick-borne diseases in Pennsylvania, and I think this is key. The impacts are serious. This organization started by parents whose children were affected and saw neurological, cognitive, and psychiatric impacts that, when properly diagnosed and treated, were completely reversed. We all know that the roll-up of that in terms of quality of life, in terms of cost, societal cost, and individual cost is very high. And if just a small percentage of some of these serious diseases can be reversed, it behooves us to take those actions. So in our view, the situation is very serious. Related to this is #2, and that is that short-term actions that in fact are low cost are needed and are within your reach to shift the perception of this disease. In Pennsylvania, we are very focused on prevention and awareness programs and are funded by the Department of Health to launch the first prevention program. We believe that the language about this disease needs to shift from it being benign to being potentially quite serious. That will allow departments of health to take action.
Your next speaker is Beth Vanderhyde. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Thank you for allowing the 4 alpha-gal advocates to comment today on behalf of the thousands affected by alpha-gal syndrome, AGS, across the U.S. and worldwide. In the comments by Beth Vanderhyde, Jennifer Burton, Tim Opilia, and Dr. Jennifer Platt, we'll take this opportunity to share with you the concerns and experiences of the AGS community. We'll present many significant gaps involving the Lone Star tick, which is associated with at least 8 diseases and conditions identified by the CDC. The facts presented should be of keen interest to all here today, all of which are transferable to all of your 6 working group committees and their affiliations. Facts to consider. Lone Star ticks are found in over 1,300 counties and 39 states and growing in the U.S., according to the CDC. A 2017 report recorded in the U.S. National Library of Medicine confirmed alpha-gal IgE reactivity to Lyme, Borrelia, and Exosrictinus. AGS is known to stem from 6 other ticks worldwide. This puts the U.S. citizens and our active armed forces at risk. The following highlights have far-reaching impact, all stemming from AGS, which again remains unmonitored. Vast and social economical consequences, U.S. healthcare system, education awareness and treatment materials. Also, the need for accurate FDA reporting and labeling and the safe procurement and manufactured goods imported and exported worldwide. The potential for the spread of infectious disease due to our inability to participate in many vaccinations, liability and financial burdens to the public schools and employees since AGS is covered by the American Disabilities Act. Many children are at risk and many are currently experiencing daily reactions, including anaphylaxis, while at school due to exposure to simple items containing mammalian ingredients such as glue, crayons, as well as airborne reactions to dairy, covered pizza, and beef burgers while they're cooking in the school. The livestock industry is also affected since the AGS household often eliminates all mammalian foods and products, including dairy. And lastly, but not limited to, decreased acceptance in the U.S. and armed forces due to our inability to receive mandated vaccinations and the risks surrounding AGS. In closing, thank you for expanding the language here today, which will now include alpha-gal and other conditions in the discussions, research, and review of the working group scope. For the record, I am diagnosed with both alpha-gal and Lyme disease, which were left undiagnosed for 15 years and 3 years, respectively. In both cases, I self-diagnosed before being properly diagnosed by my physician. My husband and my son both are affected by Lyme. Our speakers will be supportive with evidence to you in email. Thank you.
Your next public comment comes from the line of Jennifer Burton. Go ahead, please.
I was diagnosed with alpha-gal syndrome after months of battling the common escalating symptoms of AGS: extreme fatigue, joint pain, rashes, vomiting, diarrhea, GI distress and bloating, angioedema, urticaria, and 4 anaphylactic episodes, 2 nearly fatal. I want to address the gaps in the medical, pharmaceutical, emergency services, and food industry, not only for those of us with AGS, but for others afflicted by tick-borne illnesses. Gaps: better education and resources for the medical industry regarding the 20-plus tick-borne illnesses and their symptoms, questioning patients if they've been recently bitten by a tick. Not doing so risks patients' lives, their quality of life, and results in months or years of improper patient, institutional, and elder care, medications, medical and insurance bills, and personal financial losses. One study cites 43 of those with AGS were self-diagnosed. Many are diagnosed with one tick-borne illness and then years later diagnosed with 2 or more. This is true for Lyme patients with AGS and with AGS patients with latent Lyme. The majority of doctors send AGS patients away with instructions: just don't eat beef or pork, and it'll go away in 2 to 5 years. Current statistics show only 1 in 300 go into remission, and if bitten again, reactions return and worsen. AGS is a tick-borne illness that is life-altering and life-threatening with many adverse reactions. sadly afflicting many children. Gaps, education of first responders, paramedics, and emergency room personnel, especially in anaphylaxis cases. Many of us have nearly died from improper treatment due to the lack of AGS knowledge, improper diagnosis, and drugs that were administered that contain mammalian byproducts. Gaps, educating pharmacists. One article cites, pharmacists should be cognizant of patients presenting with anaphylaxis symptoms and with a history of exposure to ticks. For the majority of us, ingesting meds and supplements containing gelatin capsules, lactose, whey, magnesium, stearate, and other mammal sources keep our systems constantly agitated and has caused anaphylactic reactions. Gaps, accurate and full disclosure of all ingredients in food labeling. For example, natural flavoring for spices, which could contain mammal source ingredients. This alone would allow millions with food allergies and those of us who react to trace mammalian sources the ability to avoid it. Conclusion, there are many gaps, but the keys are education, awareness, and prevention, not only in the medical field, but throughout the general public. Without those keys, the number of people with tick-borne illnesses and deaths will only increase exponentially, just as ticks and the pathogens they carry have. Thank you.
Your next public comment comes from the line of Gary Sweeney. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Rich Walitsky. Just let me jump in real quick 1 second and explain to people. When you hear that alarm sound goes off, I mean, that's a 15-second warning, and then the operator will close in the line at the time limit. And so we want to warn you and explain what's going on there. So apologize for abruptly cutting people off at the start. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
My daughter has been stricken with Lyme for over 10 years. Our story is similar to many others presented here. Our healthy high school daughter experienced extreme fatigue, joint pain, and brain fog. Over months, many specialists were consulted. A positive IG on Western blot was dismissed as false positive due to duration of symptoms. We were told by almost all of our doctors Lyme does not exist in Georgia. A few doctors suggested psychiatric counseling. Almost a year into searching for a diagnosis, our daughter's symptoms worsened. We went out of state to a doctor educated in diagnosing and treating Lyme. Initially, oral antibiotic treatment was followed by IV antibiotics for 6 months. After treatment, there was significant improvement, but it came at great monetary expense due to insurance denial. With often occurrences of symptoms, our daughter earned a net. Despite symptoms and treatments affecting her, our daughter struggles to lead as normal life as possible. Currently, she's in treatment for extreme fatigue. At times, life is difficult for our family. Experiencing life with a child who continues to suffer 10 years past diagnosis, I find myself with many pertinent and important questions regarding diagnosis, treatment, and the basic biology of spirochetes that I want to present to you. Why are victims and their families told Lyme does not exist in non-endemic areas? Are black-legged ticks the only vectors for Lyme? What about lone ticks? How do Bleb's amplification and changes in expression of outer surface proteins interact with the immune system? Is it possible the immune system is severely downregulated to allow viral and other biological opportunistic things to thrive?
We've lost you.
Drop off.
Your next public comment comes from the line of Timothy Opela. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Hello, and thank you for allocating me this opportunity to speak to you about emerging tick-borne disease known as alpha-gal. My name is Timothy Opela. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been researching and educating victims of venomous Lone Star tick bites for the last 7.5 years, including parents with children with alpha-gal. My research commitment for alpha-gal stems from my daughter's being bitten by a Lone Star tick, which gave her alpha-gal at age 6 in 2010. At that time, she was a healthy figure skating champion with Olympic dreams. In observation of the rapid geographical spread and sheer number of newly diagnosed alpha-gal cases, especially amongst children, I happen to wonder, are we at the evolution, the cusp of the creation of a new alpha-gal generation of children? As you may or may not be aware, alpha-gal is not limited to just ingestion of meats and or byproducts. It's much more pervasive and encompassing. The area I'd like to focus on is the impact of vaccines on children with alpha-gal. HE children are not able to be safely vaccinated for many of the recommended and required vaccines because they are grown in mammalian product or byproduct, such as gelatin. A review of 61 vaccines deemed important by the CDC, 38 contain mammalian-derived ingredients, rendering them unsafe for children with alpha-gal. This means only 37% of the vaccines potentially safe to administer to a person with alpha-gal, leaving unprotected and preventable diseases 63% of the time. Due to gaps in research and because alpha-gal children are not vaccinated, exposure to infectious disease will affect everyone here in the United States. Last year alone, our daughter, along with sons and daughters of other people, kids with alpha-gal, were not able to receive vaccines such as HPV, Tdap, and meningitis. These are not vaccines we want to have administered to our children, but simply safely could not. By not being able to have a growing number of alpha-gal people vaccinated, gaps the infectious disease pathways and becomes an obvious risk for the general public. Alpha-gal and Lone Star tick populations, such as in Long Island, New York, Charlottesville, Lynchburg, Virginia, and Chatham County, North Carolina, with record numbers of alpha-gal cases, become now breeding grounds for an increase of infectious disease potential both now and in the future. I request of this well-respected committee to include alpha-gal as part of the emerging tick-borne disease conditions and national efforts to prevent gaps of future spreading of infectious diseases. Thank you for your time, review, and consideration.
Thank you. And as a reminder for those, once you hear the alarm, there's 15 seconds remaining. Your next question, or your next comment comes from the line of Jennifer Platt. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I am the CEO and founder of Tick Warriors, a private company based in Chatham County, North Carolina. Chatham is a widely recognized hotspot for illness in both North Carolina and the U.S. In 2011, while I was working on my doctorate in public health from UNC, I contracted ehrlichiosis and was later confirmed to also have Lyme and WCS. In 2015, I worked with our local health department to conduct an exploratory survey about exposure to ticks. 94% of respondents indicated that one or more people in their household were exposed to a tick within the previous year. Subsequent surveys yield similar results. Our exposure in Chatham is more than double the national household exposure average of 45%, according to a 2015 CDC study. Tick-borne illnesses are not rare here, but we can't track or validate the impact of AGS and other, quote, conditions such as SARI, heart-limb virus, and tick paralysis because none of them have a specific ICD-10 diagnosis code. In the Southeast U.S., 5 species of ticks bite humans, more than any other region in the country. At least 11 associated human pathogens have been identified. Any tick can cause paralysis. When patients are suspected to have at least one pathogen, more complete testing of all is desperately needed. I urge you to read the letter to the editor in this month's CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, which discusses the spread of the Lone Star tick into the northeastern U.S. and raises more issues than I can address here. One critical issue is the complications of using the presence of EM to diagnose Lyme disease. There is the possibility that LD case numbers are inaccurate because the Lone Star tick bite can also produce an EM. This may help explain why growing numbers of Lyme patients are discovering they react to red meat. Clearly, AGS goes way beyond problems with eating red meat. For many reasons highlighted, misdiagnoses run rampant. As experienced by those with Lyme disease for decades, AGS patients are also invalidated by their healthcare providers and loved ones. The consequences, emotional, economic, social, are devastating. Thank you for your decision to include AGS and other conditions in the report. For additional emphasis, you may want to consider expanding the charter language and vision statement to tick-borne diseases and conditions. Thank each and every one of you for your commitment to this initiative. We all bear the burdens of tick-borne illness and owe the full picture to ourselves, individuals, and taxpayers. Any less is not acceptable.
Your next comment comes from the line of Jenna Blair. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks for having me on today. First off, I'd like to remind the working group that Borrelia are relapsing fever germs, and just like the rest, they're capable of antigenic variation. That fact alone makes it a ridiculous notion to attempt to vaccinate against it, and asinine at best to say that vaccines for spirochetes work by turning human blood into tick disinfectant. Secondly, Ospe is panthericus, a fungal-like endotoxin that causes immune suppression, and that means that it is the opposite of a vaccine. For the last 18 and a half years, the activist groups Action Lyme and now Truth Cures have been filing complaints with every .gov agency anyone can think of. This was even brought to the FDA formally. The Ospe causes immune suppression and a systemic disease, say Dattweiler and Philippe. And I'm directly quoting here from a patent owned by David Perking and Robert Schoen, who say that Ospe causes a disease indistinguishable from late chronic neurologic Lyme, but never once has any .gov agency or MD answered the question as to how Ospe alone caused the same exact multi-system protein disease. No spirochetes, same disease. The science was settled as far back as 1986 when, for example, Paul Duray, who's a top Army pathologist, reported that the lymphocytes in spinal fluid looked like leukemia or lymphoma and appeared to be Epstein-Barr transformed. Also in the 1980s, it was Alan Steer himself who reported that this was like pseudolymphoma. Gary Wormser has reported that Ospe causes immune suppression 3 times now. So, do we really not know anything about relapsing fever organisms? Post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, or chronic Lyme, or whatever you want to call it, is really an acquired immune deficiency, or what the NIH calls post-sepsis syndrome. Everyone says so. There is no question. Every subcommittee needs to be viewing the disease through the lens of this really being a B-cell AIDS. The only way forward is for HHS to admit the role of Ospe as a self-disabler. Ospe could never have been a vaccine. It never was, and it never will be because it is a fungal-like endotoxin. Spirochetal diseases are not easily treatable infections. They are acquired immune deficiency detonators with a cancer-like twist. We demand that you answer as to what the structure and function of Ospe is, and that alone will give you the foundation to squash all of the controversy. If this committee fulfills its intended purpose altruistically, you will look at the existing science to validate what is really going on with Lyme disease, and you will recommend a criminal prosecution to stop the madness. TruthCures.org has all the data in their chart sheet. Thank you.
So, operator, I think we got one more commenter. Is that true?
Yeah, the line of Kathy Nodal. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. The biggest complaint I have about the crazy controversy regarding Lyme disease is the vehement denial of facts, truth, and the real science that exists today. There is only one truth, not tailor-made versions of it to suit each and every one of us. This committee will have failed everyone if the U.S. government does not state for public record what exactly Ospe is, or outer surface protein is, and what its structure and function are. The answer to this will cut to the chase and answer all other questions. If we know it is a fungal endotoxin that causes immunosuppression, then we can end this false dichotomy over persistence and antibiotics. Killing spirochetes is not the answer to this disease. There has been a crime committed here. The crime is the falsified case definition of Lyme disease. We demand prosecution of the individuals who are responsible for changing the case definition at the 1994 Dearborn Conference, chaired by Barbara Johnson of the CDC and aided by Alan Steer's research fraud used to falsify the case definition. This conference facilitated the approval of the science of the since failed Lyme vaccine, which has been pulled off the market for causing the same multi-system disease as those of us suffering from neuro-Lyme. Ospe was in the vaccine, and Ospe and other lipoproteins like it are shed with blebs or other exosomes by spirochetes. Spirochetes cause disease by going straight to the germinal centers of our lymph nodes. See the work done by Nicole Baumgart and Steve Bartol. The current testing makes absolutely no sense when you when you understand that Borrelia are relapsing fever germs. Borrelia is differentiated by the flagellum genes or DNA. Since all relapsing fever organisms are capable of antigenic variation, they can change their outer surface protein as a way of evading the host immune system. The only scientifically valid way to test for Borrelia infections would be to test for flagellar antibodies instead of outer surface proteins because it is specific and it never changes. Testing for so many antibodies all at the same time is not logical or valid by any standard. Neil Spickrig and Flavell patented a test in 1991, patent number 5618.533, which is 94 to 95% accurate during all stages of the disease. This is obviously the test that should be used. Until we get the correct definition of the disease, we will never find a cure. We have wasted too many years and too many dollars trying to fix a disease that is currently defined incorrectly by design. I am tired of watching my friends die and suffer torturous life due to this crime. The insanity of it all needs to stop now. Go to truthcures.org for the scientific validation needed to prosecute this crime.
And this is Rich Walitsky again. I guess, operator, if we're able to get Gary Sweeney back on the line, we'll go ahead and give him 3 minutes to make his public comment over. Seems like maybe a technical difficulty caused him to get lost off the line.
Hey, Mr. Sweeney, your line is open.
Thank you for allowing me to continue. Experiencing life with a child who continues to suffer 10 years past diagnosis, I find myself with many pertinent and important questions in diagnosis, treatment, and basic biology of spirochetes that I want to present to the group at this time. Why are victims and their families told that Lyme does not exist in non-endemic areas? Are black-legged ticks the only vectors for Lyme? What about Lone Star ticks? What methods do spirochetes employ to evade or disrupt the complement system? What are the interactions between spirochetes and toll-like receptors? Is it possible the immune system is severely downregulated to allow viral and other opportunistic infections to thrive? Why do the IDSA and CDC still rely exclusively on imprecise two-tier testing? What were the criteria for selecting which bands and the number of bands needed for positive Western blot? What about bands specific for Lyme, like the flagella? If the immune system is compromised, it's possible for bands not to show. Do we currently test for multiple strains of spirochetes, or is that test for only one strain from the northeastern United States? What is the outlook for using PCR testing and testing to identify tick-borne infections? Was Dearborn valid and properly vetted by diverse scientific and medical communities? Why are patients routinely limited to only 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotics? How do physicians treat persistent infection without fear of license revocation and professional persecution? Why does the Dat-Lauer study remain the gold standard employed by the IDSA for limited treatment recommendations? Should it be subject to renewed scrutiny? For far too long, victims of Lyme and their families have struggled to find and pay for treatment. For far too long, groups have talked over, around, and against one another, presenting their guidelines for treatment and diagnosis of tick-borne disease. Meanwhile, victims suffer and disease spreads. Lyme has emerged as the #1 reported vector-borne disease in our country, but lags and funding levels commensurate with this ranking. United efforts to provide information about tick-borne diseases, to provide effective diagnosis and treatment, and to enact preventative measures needs to receive utmost attention. Victims of tick-borne diseases deserve no less. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, so those were the speeches. Certainly some powerful emotion and experiences, and a lot of statements made that are concerning. And I think a few things that I want to point out from the speeches that go along with the slide here in the final thoughts is that, you know, obviously everything that relates to a tick-borne condition really deserves a lot more conversation than it has been historically receiving. The stakes are just too high. In fact, what's important to keep in mind, you hear the public very emotional but incredibly restrained this is very personal. You know, every day they're living with this and spending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars trying to get help because the research or the solutions haven't moved fast enough and people are dying. And in fact, what's important to understand, every single person listening to this, please understand the audience that we were speaking to. Not only is this their job and they're passionate about their job, or they wouldn't have been invested in staying in that career, but many of them have a personal connection. Either they've been sick themselves or their children, or they've lost their children or spouses. So there's a good group in there that really do hear us when we're speaking passionately, and they understand, like Gary had mentioned, that his daughter was referred for psychiatric treatment. That is the case for many of us. I mean, it sounds crazy. And then as we're being treated in an emergency situation, we're being treated as if we're crazy because, I mean, it is crazy. It just sounds crazy, doesn't it? That we've been bitten by a tick and now we're allergic to certain meats and it's a delayed reaction. None of that has happened before. We don't have a direct cause to a food allergy. We don't have food allergies with delayed reactions, and we certainly don't involve ticks into the conversation of food allergies. So it's we as patients understand how crazy it's sounding, but it's so frustrating when that you are dealing with this every single day, 365 days a year. It never goes away, and it affects every single aspect of our life, from working on a job site, like I explained, going to the ER, or, to standard medical procedures. Patients with this allergy after a while really get worn down, just like folks with Lyme. And what's worse is they stop going to the doctor as frequently as they once did. And that's because they're not being heard. And as much as we can all agree that, we have false negatives and false positives in the testing, and you heard some of the concerns with the testing, it's well documented, some of the concerns. It also makes sense that trying to get an accurate detection of how much alpha-gal are in these different products at the minute, subsets of ingredients, it's not there either. What is there is the reaction. We're living it every day. So, keep it in mind, please, everybody, whether you're a patient or you're in the working group or you're one of the researchers or you're a physician trying to get more information, we all understand how crazy this sounds. And we all are frustrated for our own reasons. I mean, the medical community, you're frustrated because you don't have the information to help your patients. And the researchers, you're kind of held captive by the definitions and terms that your job defines. And so we are so thankful once again, which is really important to say. We're really, really thankful to those of you on the working group who understand this and are volunteered and applied to be in the position that you're in, because you're making a significant difference in many people's lives. And we can't thank you enough for including alpha-gal and other tick-borne conditions into the conversation. So in closing, what I want to say is thank you. And if you suspect you have alpha-gal, please consult your doctor for testing. Again, you can get yourself a copy of this slide. There's a hyperlink to some information about testing. A copy of the YouTube video can be found by searching for alpha-gal syndrome presents to tick-borne diseases working group to 12/2018. It's the title of the video. You can also request a copy of this slide, which will have the hyperlinks. You do so by emailing me at tickborneconditionsunited@gmail.com. Again, my name is Beth Carrison Vanderhyde. And support, if you are a member or if you're a family member or even a physician and you're looking to get a little more insight and information to support somebody with alpha-gal, I encourage you to reach out to us at alpha-gal support non-public. There are many, many pages out there, but this is the one that's really the central page, and they're offshoots were designed to create a more localized group so that people can meet physically with somebody who understands and that can help them. So we stay very connected, all the admins. We're trying really hard to remain that way so that information flows, and just like the working group's trying to oversee making sure that redundancies aren't done and you know, time is spent wisely. So lastly, we all want to say this to you. Please be careful. Educate yourself on how to best prevent tick bites for the safety of not just you, but your family, whether that's your children or your parents, maybe, your employees, so those people that are like first responders or facility staff folks, and you know, maybe even a customer if you own a hotel or like a hiking adventure type organization. You want to make sure that your employees and your clients, your customers, your guests are safeguarded. And then of course, please protect your pets. We love them. They are also members of our family, but they're also a big dragnet just picking up. I mean, we just had a member post a picture of about a dozen ticks that they got just off the belly of their dog right here in February. So how do you do that? How do you get educated? Well, you can look on the CDC website, but like we said, some of that information is missing. Tick Warriors is a great resource. Dr. Jennifer Platt from Tick Warriors, she provides services, education, and eco-friendly products to help reduce damage from ticks and tick bites. And for those of you that have alpha-gal, know that she has repellent for your body, but also your yard, and it is alpha-gal friendly. That's a big one. And then Tick Encounter Resource Center, the tick guy, Thomas Mather, he's actually on the working committee as one of the subcommittee members. So that's really exciting. They've been incredibly helpful to us in the alpha-gal community. Wonderfully responsive folks there. If you need to chat, they're there for you, so you can talk with them as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate your patience listening, and I hope you learned something. I would love feedback. You can hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or, you know, My Homegrown Wellness or this tick-borne conditions united at Gmail. And I would love to share your commentary with the rest of the group. So excited you listened. I hope you learned, and please be careful out there. Okay. Thank you. And until next time.